I almost didn't answer. My phone buzzed on the metal shelf above my bunk at Fort Bragg, and when I flipped it over and saw Linda Mason's mom on the screen, I hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. Linda rarely called me directly. She usually texted, and even those were short. Polite, but short. The kind of short that tells you someone is being careful with their words. I pressed answer anyway. "Sergeant Natalie." Her voice was warm, warmer than I'd heard it in months, maybe longer. "Yes, ma'am, everything okay?" "More than okay, sweetheart." She laughed softly, and the sound of it caught me off guard. Linda Mitchell did not laugh like that, not with me. "Listen, I need you to do something for me. Come home early tonight. Mason and I have been planning something special for you. We want the whole family together." I sat up straighter on my bunk. Outside my window, a group of soldiers was running drills in the late afternoon heat, their boots hitting the dirt in perfect unison. I had 2 more hours of administrative duty before my shift officially ended, but my co had already told me I could leave early if I wrapped my paperwork. "How early?" I asked. 6 o'clock, maybe a little before. We want you here before dinner." She paused, and I heard what sounded like voices in the background quickly hushed. "Don't be late, Natalie. It really matters tonight." After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hands for a long moment. I should tell you something about my life before I continue, because this story won't make sense without it. My name is Natalie Renee Hayes. I am 31 years old. I am a sergeant first class in the United States Army, stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I joined at 22, fresh out of college with a political science degree and a stubborn belief that I wanted to do something that actually mattered. 9 years later, that belief hadn't changed, even on the hard days. Especially on the hard days. I met Mason Mitchell at a cookout 3 years ago. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a laugh that filled whatever room he was standing in. He worked in commercial real estate in Fayetteville, which meant he wore nice suits and talked about square footage the way I talked about mission parameters. We were different in almost every way. But the first time he asked me about my work and actually listened to the answer, instead of waiting for his turn to talk, I thought, maybe this is something real. We married 14 months after we met. Small ceremony. 12 people. My best friend, Corporal Dana Reeves, was my maid of honor. Mason's younger brother, Tyler, was the best man. Linda sat in the front row in a cream-colored dress and smiled through the whole thing, and I remember thinking, for a brief and hopeful moment, that she had accepted me. That feeling lasted about 4 months. After that, the small things began. Comments about my schedule. Questions about when I planned to step back from the military. Suggestions, delivered with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, that perhaps a woman in her 30s should be thinking about starting a family instead of staying on base. I absorbed all of it quietly, the way the Army had trained me to absorb discomfort. You don't react. You observe. You adapt. You keep moving. But it wears on you. 3 years of small cuts leave a wound just as real as one large one. Mason, for his part, rarely intervened. He would catch my eye across the dinner table when Linda said something pointed, and he would give me a look that I had trained myself to read as sympathy. Now, looking back, I wonder if I was reading it wrong the whole time. Still, that evening when I gathered my paperwork and told my unit I was heading out early, I was smiling. Something in Linda's voice had been different, genuine almost, and Mason had sent me a text earlier that week that said simply, "I love you, Nat. I'm proud of everything you do." I had read it 3 times. I changed out of my uniform in the locker room, pulling on dark jeans and a soft gray sweater. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment. My hair was natural, pulled back neatly. My eyes were tired in that familiar way, the deep-in-the-bones tiredness that comes from months of early mornings and long hours. But I was smiling. I drove home through a pale orange sunset, the radio playing softly, windows cracked just enough to let in the evening air. I remember thinking, this is the start of something better. I remember thinking, maybe I was wrong about Linda all along. I remember thinking, tonight is going to be a good night. I was wrong about all 3. The house looked different when I turned onto our street. Cars lined the curb on both sides, more than I had ever seen outside our home before. I recognized Mason's dark blue SUV and Linda's silver sedan. But there were at least 8 other vehicles I couldn't place. One was a white Mercedes I had never seen. Another was a black pickup truck with a dealer sticker still on the back window. I pulled into the driveway and sat behind the wheel for a moment. Voices drifted through the front windows. Low, layered, the sound of a room full of people who had been talking for a while. I could see light flickering through the curtains. Someone had lit candles. I told myself it was a surprise party, maybe for my promotion. I had recently been recommended for Staff Sergeant First Class, and Mason knew how much that meant to me. Maybe Linda had organized something. Maybe I had misjudged her all along. I grabbed my bag, squared my shoulders, and walked to the front door. It opened before I could knock. Mason stood in the doorway. He was wearing a blue dress shirt I hadn't seen before, collar open, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked like he had been waiting. He stepped back and swept his arm inward, the gesture so polished it almost looked rehearsed. "Nat," he said, "come on in." I stepped inside and the voices stopped. The living room was packed. Every chair was occupied. People sat along the edges of the sectional sofa, some standing near the fireplace. There were people leaning against the wall by the kitchen doorway. 2 older women I had never seen sat on the love seat near the window, both watching me with expressions I couldn't immediately read. A man in a gray blazer stood near the dining room table with his arms crossed. Linda was near the back of the room, standing very still, her hands folded in front of her. Not one of them smiled. I scanned the room quickly the way I had been trained to scan unfamiliar environments. Exit points, body language, threat indicators. My training kicked in before my heart could fully process what my eyes were seeing. "Mason," I said quietly, "what is this?" He didn't answer right away. He moved to the center of the room, stepped past me, and reached for something on the coffee table. A white envelope, the kind you'd get from a law office or a financial institution. Thick, sealed. He placed it on the table in front of me. In front of everyone. "Open it," he said. The room was so quiet, I could hear the candle on the mantel flickering. My hands reached for the envelope before my brain fully gave the instruction. I turned it over. No return address. My name on the front in typed letters, Natalie Mitchell. My fingers found the edge of the flap. I started to pull. And then Mason started laughing. It wasn't the laugh I had fallen in love with. That laugh was warm and full and spilled over the edges of itself. This laugh was different, shorter, sharper, the kind of laugh that has a point to it. "Go ahead," he said, still smiling. "Everyone's been waiting." I pulled the envelope fully open and looked inside. What I found there did not make sense to me at first. I took the papers out slowly, unfolding them with steady hands, because I had learned a long time ago that shaking hands give people power over you. I read the first line. Then I read it again. The room seemed to tilt very slightly. I was holding a set of printed photographs, and a single typed letter on what appeared to be law firm letterhead. And underneath that, a document with my name on it and a title I had to read 3 times before my mind accepted what it said. The photographs showed me, at Fort Bragg, in the parking lot near the administrative building, standing near a silver car talking to a man in uniform, Captain Derek Lawson, my commanding officer's aide, a colleague, a man I had spoken to maybe 40 times in 3 years of professional work. The letter beneath the photographs claimed, in very precise language, that I had been conducting a romantic relationship with Captain Lawson for the better part of 8 months. The document underneath claimed the same. I lifted my eyes from the papers. The room was watching me. Linda had moved slightly, positioning herself beside Mason, her chin raised. And Mason was still smiling. I said the only word that came to me in that moment. "No." Nobody moved. I said it again, louder this time, not shouting, not breaking, just firm and clear, the same voice I used when I needed my unit to hear me over noise. "No, this is not true." Mason tilted his head slightly, like a man hearing an excuse he had already prepared for. "Natalie." "Who are these people?" I asked. My voice was steady. I looked around the room deliberately, making eye contact with strangers one at a time. "I don't know most of you. Why are you in my house?" Linda stepped forward. "Our house," she said, "and they're here because this is a family matter and some of them are family." "Then why don't I know them?" She didn't answer that. I looked at the photographs again. Captain Lawson's car, the parking lot, me in civilian clothes with my hand on the passenger door because I had been handing him a folder of budget reports he'd asked me to pass along. I remembered the exact day, a Tuesday in March, cold enough that I'd been wearing my green jacket. I could still feel the folder in my hands. "These photographs have been taken out of context," I said. Mason shook his head slowly. "The photographer said, 'You hired a photographer to follow me.'" The sentence came out flat, not a question. I looked at him very carefully. "You hired someone to photograph me at work." A small sound moved through the room. Not quite discomfort, not quite surprise, something between the two. "I needed the truth," Mason said. I placed the papers back on the coffee table, very carefully, very deliberately, and then I looked at my husband. I studied his face the way I would study a map I was trying to memorize before a mission. The blue shirt, the folded arms, the smile that had faded now into something harder. I had loved this man's face. I had memorized every expression that lived in it, and what I saw in that moment was not the face of a man who had been hurt and was seeking answers. It was the face of a man who had already made a decision and was waiting for the paperwork to catch up. Something cold and clear settled inside my chest. I picked up my bag. I picked up the envelope with its contents. I looked at Linda, who was watching me with an expression I now recognized for what it truly was. Not anger, not even triumph, anxiety. The kind that lives in someone who is waiting to see whether their plan is going to hold. "I'm going to leave now," I said quietly. "You're leaving," Mason's voice rose. "You're not going to explain yourself." "I don't explain myself to a courtroom that was assembled before I walked through the door." I moved toward the hallway. "When you're ready to have an actual conversation, you know how to reach me." Linda's voice came from behind me, sharp. "If you walk out that door, Mason is filing for divorce." I stopped walking, not because the words stopped me, because I wanted everyone in that room to see that they didn't. I turned around one last time. "If he files," I said calmly, "then I look forward to the process, because the truth tends to come out during that kind of thing." I glanced at the envelope in my hand. All of it. I walked out. Behind me, the room erupted in noise. I got into my car and sat there for 60 seconds, doing the same breathing exercise my first drill sergeant had taught me when I was 22 years old. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. I did it 3 times. Then I called Dana. She answered on the second ring. "I need somewhere to stay tonight," I said. A pause, then, "My guest room is already yours. Come now, I'll put the kettle on." I drove through the dark streets of Fayetteville with the envelope on the passenger seat, and I made myself one single promise. I would not fight this with tears. I would fight it with the truth. Dana Reeves had been my closest friend since officer candidate school. She was the kind of person who listened before she spoke, which in my experience is rarer than any military decoration. She poured 2 cups of tea, set them on the kitchen table, and sat across from me while I laid out every paper from the envelope. She read everything twice. "Okay," she said finally. She looked up. "First question, do you know who took these photographs?" "No." "Second question, does Mason know Derek Lawson personally?" I thought about it. I mentioned his name once. Early last year, Mason asked who my direct supervisors were. Dana nodded slowly. She pulled the typed letter closer and read it again. Then she pointed to the bottom of the page. "This letterhead. Have you ever heard of this firm?" I looked. Hargrove and Associates Family Law, Fayetteville, NC. "Never." "I have." She sat back. "My neighbor used them in her divorce 2 years ago. She said they were fast and they were expensive and they weren't particularly careful about what information they used." She paused. She also said they worked with a private investigation firm, a man named Garrett. Something shifted in my chest. Not shock, something closer to recognition. Mason planned this, I said. Not a revelation. More like saying out loud what I had already understood since I walked into that room. The question is for how long, Dana said. That night, after Dana's apartment went quiet, I sat at her kitchen table alone with a notepad and worked through everything I could remember from the past several months. Mason's late nights. The business trips that had started 3 months ago, first once a month, then twice. The way he had stopped asking about my work, not gradually, but suddenly the way a radio cuts out between stations. The credit card statement I had noticed in February, the one with a charge from a hotel downtown that I had assumed was a client dinner and had forgotten about by the next morning. I wrote it all down. Then I looked at the photographs again. They were convincing. I won't lie about that. Someone had taken them carefully, at angles that suggested intimacy from a distance. But the military had given me a very precise gift, the ability to read context that civilians sometimes miss. In every single photograph, there was something visible in the background that told the exact date and time. Flagpole positions, vehicle lot configurations. On one, the corner of a posted duty roster I recognized from a Thursday morning rotation. Every photograph was from a duty day. Every single one showed me doing my job. I took out my personal planner. An old habit, paper and pen, dates and notes written in the margins. I matched each photograph to a date. Then I started writing a different kind of list. Not what Mason had claimed, what had actually happened, with documentation. By 2 a.m, I had 8 pages of notes. I looked at them for a long moment. Then I picked up the business card I had kept in the back pocket of my planner since a legal assistance briefing the previous year. Major Carol Simmons, Military Legal Assistance Office, Fort Bragg. I would call her at 800. I turned off the kitchen light, and for the first time since walking out of that house, I let myself feel exactly what I was feeling. Not anger, not sadness, something quieter and more dangerous than either. I felt focused. Major Carol Simmons had a corner office in the JAG building that smelled like old paper and strong coffee, and she listened to my entire story without interrupting once. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. Did you sign anything in that room last night? No. Did you make any verbal agreements? No. She nodded and opened her notepad. Good, then we're starting from a clean position. She looked at the photographs, then at the letter, then at the document with my name. This law firm isn't military. They don't have standing to make any claim regarding your service record or conduct. That part is outside their lane entirely. She set the papers down. But the divorce filing, if Mason moves forward, is civil. That's a separate matter. I understand. Here's what I want you to do. She leaned forward. Don't contact Mason. Don't contact Linda. Don't respond to anything from Hargrove and Associates. Let them move first. Let their move create a record. She paused. And in the meantime, I need you to pull every piece of documentation you can find that places you at your duty station on the dates of these photographs. I already had that. I slid my notepad across the desk. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at me. You put this together last night? Yes, ma'am. A small smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Good soldier. What I didn't tell Major Simmons, not yet, was the other thing I had discovered that morning. Dana had been awake before me. She was sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open when I came downstairs. And the look on her face told me immediately that she had found something. Sit down, she said. She turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was a social media profile. Private mostly, but the profile photograph was public. A woman with dark hair and a wide smile standing in front of what looked like a beach house. Her name was Colette Warren, and in the corner of her most recent public photograph, just visible over her left shoulder, was a framed picture on a wall. I leaned in closer. It was a photograph I recognized, not because I had ever been to Colette Warren's home, because it was a photograph that used to hang in my own living room. Mason's family at the beach, the summer before we married. Linda, Mason, Tyler, all of them in matching white shirts on a dock at sunset. I had taken that photograph down from our living room wall myself, 6 months ago. It had been replaced by a canvas print Dana gave us as a second anniversary gift. I had moved the family photo to the hallway. The last time I had seen it, it was in our hallway. Now it was in this woman's home. I sat back in Dana's kitchen chair. "Who is she?" I asked. Dana's expression was very careful. "She works at the same commercial real estate firm as Mason. She was hired 8 months ago." She paused. "And 2 weeks ago she posted a check-in tag, a restaurant in downtown Raleigh, tagged as date night." She didn't need to say the rest. Mason had not been in Raleigh 2 weeks ago. He told me he was in Charlotte for a client meeting. I looked at Dana. "I need a real attorney," I said. "A civilian family lawyer." "I already looked one up," she said, and pushed a printed business card across the table. Rebecca Hartley, family law, 15 years of experience. She had represented military spouses before. I called her before 9 that morning. And I told her everything. Rebecca Hartley's office was on the 3rd floor of a building in downtown Fayetteville, and she was exactly the kind of woman who made you feel, simply by being in her presence, that the situation was still manageable. She was calm in the way that only people who have seen genuine chaos can be calm, settled, unshakable, attentive. She listened to my story. She looked at my notes. She looked at the photographs. Then she asked me one question I hadn't expected. "Do you have access to your joint financial accounts?" "Yes." "When did you last look at them?" "A few weeks ago, everything seemed—" I stopped, seemed normal, but I hadn't looked closely. I had been busy. I was always busy. "I can look now." She turned her laptop toward me, and I logged into our joint checking account. The balance was less than half of what it should have been. I scrolled back through 3 months of transactions. My direct deposit from the Army, regular and consistent. Mason's deposits, which had always been substantial given his real estate commissions. And then, scattered throughout like small stones disappearing into still water, a series of transfers. Amounts that were large enough to matter but small enough not to immediately alarm. 3,000 here, 4,000 there. One for 6,800, another for 5,200. Over 3 months, $41,000 had moved out of our joint account into an account I didn't recognize. I felt the room go very still. Rebecca was watching my face. "What do you see?" I told her. She wrote it down without blinking. "We're going to subpoena those records," she said simply, "and his phone records and his work expense reports." "He'll fight that." "He's welcome to." She clicked her pen. "People who have been secretly moving money tend not to look great when the paper trail appears in a courtroom." There was one more thing. I had been turning it over in my mind since the night before, uncertain whether it was relevant, uncertain whether I was seeing it correctly. But Rebecca's calm had given me enough steadiness to say it. "His mother called me," I said. "Linda. She was the one who told me to come home early. She said they had something special planned." Rebecca stopped writing. "She set it up," I said. "She called me specifically to make sure I walked into that room. She orchestrated the timing." Rebecca set her pen down. "Did she know about the financial transfers?" "I don't know yet." "We'll find out." She looked at me steadily. "Natalie, I want you to understand something. Your husband didn't just try to humiliate you in front of strangers. If these financial records show what I believe they're going to show, he was using your absence, your service, your trust in him, to position himself for a very advantageous divorce settlement." She folded her hands. "He expected you to be too blindsided, too emotional, too isolated to fight back effectively." I looked at her calmly. "He doesn't know me very well." For the first time since we'd sat down, Rebecca Hartley smiled. "No," she said. "I'm beginning to think he doesn't." Over the next 10 days, I stayed at Dana's. I went to work every single day because my service record was one of the strongest things I had, and I was not going to give anyone a reason to question it. I answered my phone when Mason called, listened to whatever he had to say, and said very little in response. Rebecca had told me, "Let them think the plan is working." Let them believe you are overwhelmed and uncertain. Mason's calls followed a predictable pattern. The first 3 were demanding. We need to finish this. You can't keep avoiding this. My attorney says. The 4th call was softer. Nat, I don't want this to get ugly. The 5th call was the most revealing of all. My mother just wants what's best for this family, he said. She only called you because I asked her to. I let the silence sit for a moment. She called because you asked her to, I repeated. She was doing me a favor. I thanked him for clarifying and said I'd be in touch. After I hung up, I called Rebecca. He just confirmed that his mother made that call at his direction, I said. That it was intentional. I'd like that in writing, Rebecca said. Can you get him to put it in a text? He could, and he did. 2 days later, in a message where he was trying to appear reasonable, Mason sent me a text that said, Mom called you that evening because I thought it would be easier coming from her. I needed everyone together for this conversation. I forwarded it to Rebecca within 30 seconds. She replied with 3 words. This is perfect. I want to tell you something about Captain Derek Lawson, because his name had been dragged into this without his knowledge, and he deserved better than that. I went to his office on a Wednesday morning and told him directly what had happened. I showed him the photographs. I watched his expression move from confusion to disbelief to a quiet, controlled anger that I recognized because it looked very much like my own. I need to make something clear, he said when I finished. These photographs have been deliberately misrepresented. I know. I'm not here to accuse you of anything. I'm here because your name is in a legal document, and you have a right to know that. He leaned back in his chair. What do you need from me? Nothing that causes you any trouble. But if this goes further, and there's a need to establish the professional nature of every interaction documented in these photographs, I wanted you to know that I would be making that case. He was quiet for a moment, then he looked at me directly. Sergeant Hayes, he said, I was in my office on the date of every single one of those photographs. I have meeting logs, I have email chains, I have a duty roster that doesn't lie. He folded his hands. If anyone asks me to speak to what I know, I will. I thanked him and left. What I didn't know, not yet, was that Captain Lawson would do something beyond what I had asked. He went to his own JAG advisor. He filed a formal complaint about the misuse of his identity in a private investigation context. He submitted a written statement to the record. He did it without telling me, without asking for anything. Sometimes, in the middle of a situation where everyone seems to be against you, someone does something quietly decent, and you feel it like a lifeline thrown without ceremony. That week, 3 more things happened. First, Rebecca received the subpoenaed bank records and confirmed what we had suspected. The account receiving Mason's transfers was in his name alone and had been opened 11 months earlier, 3 months before the ambush dinner, before the photographs, before any of this had begun in any visible way. The transfers had been methodical and deliberate. He had been preparing for this for nearly a year. Second, Dana discovered that Colette Warren had gone on a trip to Asheville the same weekend Mason had claimed to be in Charlotte for a client meeting. She found this through a public travel check, in that Colette had posted and then, apparently thinking better of it, deleted. But Dana had already taken a screenshot. Third, and most unexpectedly, I received a phone call from a woman I had never spoken to before. Her name was Patrice Warren. She was Colette Warren's older sister. I think you deserve to know the truth, she said, without introduction or preamble. My sister has been telling me things about this man she's been seeing. I didn't know he was married at first. When I found out, I told her she needed to stop. She said he told her his wife was going to be out of the picture soon. She paused. He called her 3 nights ago and said things were in motion, that it was almost over. I held the phone very carefully. Ms. Warren, I said, would you be willing to put what you just told me in writing? A silence. Yes, she said, I would. I want to be honest about something. When I found out about Colette Warren, I felt all the things you might expect a person to feel. The kind of anger that starts in your chest and radiates outward. The kind of grief that ambushes you in the middle of ordinary moments when you're brushing your teeth or driving to base and you suddenly remember, for the 140th time, that your marriage was a lie. I felt those things. But I also felt something else, something I hadn't expected. A kind of clarity. Because when Mason told Colette that his wife was going to be out of the picture soon, he wasn't describing a divorce proceeding. He was describing a plan, premeditated, calculated. And that distinction mattered, not just emotionally, but legally. Rebecca thought so too. "He didn't decide to leave you," she said, when I came to her office with Patris Warren's written statement. "He decided to remove you. There's a difference, and that difference is going to matter in front of a judge." We also now had something else. The private investigation firm that Mason had used, Garrett and Associates, had made a significant procedural error. They had photographed me on a federal military installation without authorization. Major Simmons had already filed a complaint regarding this through military channels, and the response had been swift. There was now an official inquiry into the firm's conduct. The letter from Hargrove and Associates, the one claiming I had been conducting an inappropriate relationship with Captain Lawson, had been sent to two people beyond myself and Mason. One was Linda Mitchell. The other was a name I didn't recognize on first reading, Robert Sims. Rebecca looked at the name for a moment. "Who is Robert Sims?" she asked. "I have no idea." She found out 3 days later. Robert Sims was a retired pastor and community figure who was, according to public records, the executor of the estate of Mason's late grandmother. An estate that included, among other assets, a property in Cumberland County worth approximately $320,000. An estate that would transfer fully to Mason Mitchell upon his marriage, remaining intact. Or, according to the will's language, to Mason Mitchell and his spouse, jointly. Rebecca set the document down very slowly. I read the relevant paragraph twice. Then I understood something I had not understood before. This wasn't just about Mason wanting to leave me for another woman. If he simply left, he stood to share a $300,000 inheritance with me, his legal spouse. But if he could prove I had been unfaithful, if he could make me the one at fault, the will's codicil regarding misconduct would potentially allow the estate's executor to reconsider the joint distribution. He hadn't been trying to humiliate me. He had been trying to disqualify me. "That," Rebecca said quietly, "is fraud." She was already dialing. That evening, I sat in Dana's apartment and did something I hadn't allowed myself to do since this began. I cried. Not for long. Not the kind of crying that loses itself, but real, honest tears for the 3 years I had believed in a marriage that had been managed from the beginning, for the dinners I had cooked while Mason was planning this, for the texts I had reread thinking they meant something they did not. Dana sat beside me without saying anything. She brought me a glass of water and a blanket and put on a documentary about national parks, and we watched it in silence until the feeling passed. When it did, I felt something settle in me, not hardness, not bitterness, something more like the moment at the start of a long run when your body stops fighting the pace and simply begins to move. I was ready. The hearing was scheduled for the second week of October, on a morning when the leaves in downtown Fayetteville had just begun to turn. I wore a charcoal gray suit and low heels. Dana drove me and waited in the lobby. Major Simmons submitted a character brief on my behalf. Captain Lawson submitted his written statement the week before. Mason arrived with his attorney, a sharp-looking man from Hargrove and Associates named Gerald Park. Linda was there, sitting 2 rows behind Mason, in a dark blue dress, her hands folded in her lap. She did not look at me when I came in. The judge was the Honorable Patricia Webb. She had the precise, unhurried manner of someone who had sat in this room long enough to know when something was being performed and when something was real. Proceedings began. Gerald Park presented Mason's case in polished, measured language. The photographs, the allegation, the claim that Natalie Hayes Mitchell had engaged in conduct unbecoming a spouse during her service assignment, and that Mason Mitchell was therefore entitled to a divorce on grounds of marital misconduct, with sole claim to all premarital assets including the pending estate distribution. He spoke for 22 minutes. Rebecca waited until he was completely finished. Then she stood. She began with the photographs. She called Major Simmons to speak to the regulatory issue, and the judge listened carefully as Major Simmons explained, in clear and simple language, that the private investigation firm Mason had hired had photographed a military sergeant on a federal installation without authorization, in violation of federal law, and that an official inquiry was already underway. She further confirmed that the photographs had been reviewed against duty logs and found to correspond, without exception, to documented professional activities. She then called Captain Lawson's written statement to be read into the record. The judge read it herself, quietly, and then set it down. Next came the financial records. Rebecca presented every transfer, every transaction. The account opened 11 months before the ambush dinner. The $41,000 moved from the joint account in small, deliberate increments. She laid it out in chronological order, and the silence in the room deepened with every page. Then she presented the estate document. The judge read the relevant clause twice. Then she looked at Mason over the top of her glasses. "Counsel," she said to Gerald Park, "I'd like you to explain the timeline to me. Your client opened a separate financial account 11 months before filing. He retained your firm's services 9 months before filing. He commissioned a private investigation 8 months before filing. And the alleged misconduct, which your client claims was the reason for this divorce, was discovered by his account 4 months ago." She set the papers down. "That's a 7-month gap between preparation and discovery." Gerald Park opened his mouth. The judge continued. "People who are surprised by their spouse's conduct don't typically plan for it 6 months in advance." The room was very quiet. Then Rebecca stood again. She presented Patris Warren's written statement. The judge read it slowly. When she finished, she looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Then she looked at Mason directly. "Mr. Mitchell, did you, at any point, tell another individual that your wife would be, quote, out of the picture soon?" Mason shifted in his seat. "That's taken out of context." "Did you, or did you not make that statement?" His attorney touched his arm. Mason's jaw tightened. "I don't recall the exact words." The judge looked at him for 3 full seconds. "I see." She called a 15-minute recess. When she returned, she delivered her ruling in language that was measured but completely clear. The photographs were inadmissible due to how they were obtained and the context misrepresentation they contained. The allegation of marital misconduct was dismissed as unsupported by credible evidence. The financial transfers from the joint account constituted marital waste and were ordered returned in full to the marital estate. The pending estate inheritance would be treated as a joint marital asset, to be divided according to standard North Carolina law. Divorce granted, on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. And then, because she wasn't finished, the private investigation firm was to be reported to the state licensing board. The misrepresentation of the photographs in a legal letter was referred for a formal ethics review of Hargrove and Associates. Mason stood up very quickly. His chair scraped against the floor. Gerald Park put a hand on his arm. I did not look at him. I looked at Rebecca, who gathered her papers with the calm efficiency of a person who had expected exactly this outcome and was ready to move to the next thing. In the hallway afterward, Mason came toward me. His face was very tight. "You think you won something," he said. I looked at him for a moment, at the blue dress shirt, now rumpled, at the expression I had once thought I knew. "Mason," I said, "I didn't want to win anything. I wanted the truth." I picked up my bag. It came out anyway. I walked toward the lobby, where Dana was already on her feet, already moving toward me with her arms open. Winter came early to Fayetteville that year. By December, the oak trees outside Dana's apartment had gone bare, and the mornings required a real coat. Emma, Dana's rescue dog, had decided she preferred sleeping on my side of the guest room floor, which Dana found endlessly amusing and which I found, quietly, comforting. There is something steadying about a living creature who simply decides you are safe and stays close. I had moved into my own apartment in November, a 2-bedroom on the second floor of a quiet complex 2 miles from the base. I painted the living room a warm sand color and bought a couch that was mine alone, in a fabric I chose alone, in a color that Mason would never have tolerated. I hung plants near the window. I bought a coffee maker that ground the beans fresh, something I had always wanted and had never allowed myself because Mason preferred instant. The small freedoms were the ones that surprised me most. I returned to full duty the Monday after the hearing. When I walked onto the base, I walked the same way I had always walked, the same stride, the same eyes forward, the same squared shoulders. But something inside me felt different. Lighter, maybe, or more honestly occupied, like a room that has been cleared of furniture that was never really yours. Major Simmons called in late November. "I wanted to update you on the inquiry into Garrett and Associates," she said. "What's the outcome?" "Their license to operate in the state of North Carolina has been suspended pending a full review. 2 additional clients have come forward with similar complaints." She paused. "The ethics review of Hargrove and Associates is still ongoing, but Gerald Park has already withdrawn from 2 active cases." I thanked her. "One more thing," she said. "Captain Lawson asked me to tell you that he submitted a formal commendation to your service record, noting your conduct throughout this matter. His words were that you handled an extraordinarily difficult situation with professionalism and integrity." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of fresh ground coffee and looked out the window at the bare December trees. Then something unexpected happened. Linda called. I stared at her name on the screen for a long moment. Then I answered. "Natalie." Her voice was different from the last time I had heard it. Not the warm, performed voice of the phone call that set everything in motion, and not the hard, controlled voice from the living room that night. Something else entirely. Something quieter. Something that sounded, if I am being honest, almost fragile. "Linda," I said. A long pause. "I want to say something to you," she said finally. "I've been trying to figure out how to say it for 2 months." I waited. "I knew what Mason was doing wasn't right," she said. "Not all of it. He didn't tell me about the money and I didn't know about the estate, but the dinner and the photographs and calling you that evening." Her voice broke slightly. "I knew enough, and I helped anyway." I didn't respond immediately. "I've spent 40 years believing that protecting my child meant protecting him from consequences," she said, "and I raised a man who believed that too." She stopped. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not sure I deserve that, but I needed you to know that I understand what I did, and that I am sorry for it." The apartment was quiet. Outside, a car moved slowly through the parking lot. "Linda," I said, "I appreciate that it took courage to make this call." She made a sound that might have been a suppressed cry. "I'm not going to tell you everything is fine," I continued. "It isn't, not all of it. What happened that night, standing in that room with all those people, being asked to open that envelope?" I stopped, found my footing, continued. "That is something I'll carry for a long time." "I know. But I'm not going to carry it as something that defines me." I looked out the window again. The trees, bare and patient, waiting for spring. "I hope Mason gets the help he needs to become an honest person, and I hope you find a way to do the same." Another long pause. "You're a better person than I gave you credit for," she said quietly. "For a long time." "Yes," I said without hostility. "I know." We said goodbye. I held the phone in both hands for a moment. Then I set it down, finished my coffee, and got up to get ready for my morning run. I want to tell you what happened after, because the end of a difficult chapter is not the end of a story. Rebecca filed the final divorce paperwork in November, and by the last week of the month everything was settled. The financial transfers were returned to the marital estate and divided fairly. I walked away with my share, which I put immediately into a savings account I opened in my own name. I also walked away with my service record, my rank, my reputation, and every year of work I had put into the career Mason had spent 3 years subtly suggesting I should consider leaving. I received my promotion to Staff Sergeant First Class in January. The ceremony was small. A handful of colleagues, Major Simmons, Dana, and Captain Lawson, who attended in full dress and shook my hand afterward without making it a bigger moment than it needed to be. "Well done, Sergeant Hayes," he said. I appreciated the use of my maiden name. I had filed to restore it the same week the divorce was finalized. In February, something else happened. Something I hadn't planned for or particularly sought, because I had decided, firmly, that I was in no hurry to plan or seek anything beyond my own peace and my own work. I was at a coffee shop near the base on a Saturday morning, notebook open, reviewing field logistics for an upcoming training exercise. A man sat down at the table next to mine. He had an easy, unhurried kind of presence, and when he glanced over and saw my notebook, he didn't immediately try to talk to me about it. He just ordered his coffee and opened a book. His name was James Archer. He was a civilian trauma counselor attached to a veterans support program at the base. We talked for about 20 minutes that morning before I had to leave. He had a steady, quiet way of listening that I recognized because it reminded me of Dana and of Major Simmons, of people who did not need to fill every silence with themselves. He asked if I'd want to get coffee again sometime. Not dinner, not anything with expectation in it, just coffee. I thought about it honestly, the way I now tried to think about everything. Whether it was right, not just whether it was easy. Whether it came from a clear place, not a complicated one. "Yes," I said, "I think I would." I'm not going to tell you that James Archer is the point of this story. He isn't. He is part of what came after, and what came after is still being written. What I will tell you is that he is exactly what he appeared to be, patient and genuine and without agenda, and that in itself is not nothing. In fact, after everything, it is quite something. Here is what I know about the year that changed everything. Mason Mitchell underestimated me because he never fully saw me. He saw a schedule, a career, a complication. He saw a woman he thought could be maneuvered because she was too busy and too tired to look closely at the edges of her own life. He was not entirely wrong about the tired part. He was entirely wrong about the rest. The photographs did not prove what he said they proved. The letter did not accomplish what he intended it to accomplish. The ambush dinner, the room full of strangers. The envelope placed on the table in front of everyone, none of it broke me. It clarified things. It showed me, in very sharp detail, exactly who the people in my life were and what I was worth to each of them. Some of those people surprised me. Captain Lawson, Patris Warren, Major Simmons, Dana, who never surprised me because she had never been anything other than exactly what she appeared to be. Some did not. But I learned something from all of them. The greatest advantage I had throughout this entire process was not my rank. It was not my documentation or my attorneys or the subpoenaed records or even the 3-star general's character reference that Major Simmons arranged to have submitted to Rebecca's office. Those things mattered. They helped, but they were tools. The advantage was this: I never stopped thinking clearly. When every instinct said to shout in that living room, I spoke at a normal volume. When every emotion said to call Mason and demand answers, I called an attorney instead. When every wound said to respond to Linda's cruelty with my own, I said only what I could stand behind. I stayed myself. That is, I have come to believe, the truest form of strength available to any person in any situation. Not the loudest response, not the sharpest one, the truest. The people who planned to remove me from my own life ended up removing themselves from it instead. Not because I wished that on them. Because truth, when you give it enough time and enough clean space to exist in, tends to do its own quiet, irresistible work. When I run in the mornings now, down the long, flat road that borders the base, in the pale gray light before the rest of the world has fully started, I sometimes think about that drive home. The orange sunset, the radio, the windows cracked just enough, the feeling that tonight was going to be something good. I wasn't wrong, not exactly. It became something good. It just took a little longer than I thought. And it looked nothing like what I expected. And it was mine. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave your thoughts below. And if you believe that truth, patience, and self-respect are the most powerful tools a person carries. Then you already understand everything Natalie Hayes understood by the end. Thank you for being here until the last word. Take care of yourself.